No one does a royal event like the Britons.
The wedding of Charles and Diana is the most iconic royal wedding in history.
It was an amazing sight.
This was the complete fairy tale wedding.
The Camela factor was still very much there.
The War of the Windsors dismantled that fairy tale very dramatically.
Welcome to Royal Exclusive Rewind. You'll look back at the triumphs, drama and defining moments in royal history. This week we rewind to July 1981, a glorious London summer's day when Britain staged the ultimate street party for the wedding of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer. More than 600,000 people packed the capital as 20-year-old Diana arrived at St Paul's Cathedral in her unforgettable gown with its 25-foot train, watched by a global audience of 750 million on TV. The balcony kiss and cheering crowds created pure royal magic, the wedding of the century. But as history would later reveal, not every fairy tale has a happy ending. Joining me to look back on that extraordinary day are former royal editor at The Sun, Charles Ray, and royal reporter for news.com.au, Bronte Coy. Welcome to you both. Now, I'm just going to put this straight out there. I think the wedding of Charles and Diana is the most iconic royal wedding in history and cannot be beaten. Discuss.
Well, you were there.
I was, yeah. I mean, as you know, when you get a big international story happening in your backyard, when you work in a newspaper, or I'm assuming even in broadcasting, nothing else matters. There's not going to be any other story in the paper whatsoever. So I wasn't covering royals at that time, but you know, I was given a place near St Paul's Cathedral to mingle with the crowds. I remember being there. God, how early it was. You had to get there so early just to get through all the security and everything else. And, talking to, various people, it was a huge, great big party outside it. So, and, obviously...
Well, people would go camp overnight.
Oh, yeah. Actually, it wasn't just overnight. There were people there for 3 or 4 days beforehand, because I remember being up there beforehand and talking to people who'd erected their little tents and sleeping bags and everything else. It was an amazing sight, and it reached a crescendo when the new Princess of Wales, as she was going to be, arrived, and of course when they left the cathedral, it was quite an incredible thing, But that was it. That was the flash that you got. Then of course it was back down to the office, which wasn't too far away from, fortunately, but you had to still walk through all these amazing crowds and stepping over bodies who were still trying to get some kip.
You said there was something like 600,000 people lining the streets. I was here for William and Catherine's wedding in 2011. I wasn't working. I was part of the street parties. It was a lot of fun, and I was here for the coronation. But you can only imagine, particularly then, with the way they were and how excited people were about it. As you say, I've gotten the atmosphere at those events. It would have been completely off the charts with this one. But to your point about it being, I think you said it was the best one we've
I think it's the most iconic.
It is the most iconic, and I think that's for a variety of reasons. It was, well, everyone obviously adored Diana. So
she was 20 years old, Bronte. 20
years old. I think he was 32 at the time of this wedding. Look at her. It was the complete, at that time, what we thought, we obviously know differently now, but we thought this was the complete fairy tale wedding. She had the fairy tale dress. It's very of its time, but it is fairy tale and it is iconic. That was designed by the Emanuels, and as you said, it had the long train and all the intricate beading, and she looked absolutely beautiful. But I think also now that it's been locked away in history, knowing what came next and how tragically this story sort of ended for Diana, it kind of locks this into even more of that moment in time that is just extremely iconic. All these pictures, everyone knows the pictures, everyone has seen all of this and followed the details of the wedding, even if, like me, I wasn't alive at the time, sorry. But
it was the dress, it was the train.
It was the fairy tale.
St Paul's Cathedral, as you pointed out, the carriage ride. I mean...
people lining the streets and the excitement. No one does a royal event like the Britons, I have to say. It's, you know, the excitement that people feel and the way that they all get involved across the country. It's just, it was at that time something that was just so celebrated.
Yeah. Charles, why was it so celebrated, as Bronte pointed out there, or people, because say Charles is in his 30s, he was the heir. What we were seeing here was effectively the future king and queen.
Absolutely, there was no question about that Diana was destined to be queen, and unfortunately we all know how all that ended. It was iconic, I suppose, because it was the start of what we all believed was going to be the fairy tale. It was all going to come good. We all wanted a great fairy tale type story at the end of it all, but you know, unfortunately, it wasn't to be like that. And you know, an awful lot of things came out. You know, like Diana the night before talking to her sisters. You know, having those second thoughts, as maybe some brides do, and you know, Sarah McCorquodale, Diana's sister, saying to her, "Well, you're too late now. Your face is on the tea towels." And that's absolutely true, because it's another thing. There were so many hawkers in the street selling mugs, trays, scarves, T-shirts, all with Diana's face on it and Charles's face on it. And it was one of those events, probably the premier event. I agree with you. It was probably the premier event that we've seen in this country, with all the sort of royal pomp and circumstance that we have every so often, with tripping the colour and all that sort of stuff is great. That's how we do it. But this one was sort of AAA plus.
It also cost. I looked this up. I was watching actually all the archival footage of it last night. I got a little bit lost in it. It's actually very dreamy and, as we've said, very fairy tale-esque. This wedding was also the most expensive. It was something like £50 million back then, which I believe with today's inflation is $285 million, which is a lot of money. It really blew my mind when I looked that up. But also when I was watching this, and actually this picture sums it up perfectly, I was watching them come back down the aisle. As I said, I went deep on watching the whole thing. But when they come back down the aisle, you can see she looks a little bit uncertain and a little bit shy, but she also looked quite excited. She has this glow on her face, like most brides do. I mean, of course, we have the benefit of hindsight and knowing what we know now, but when you're watching Charles's face, he looked very serious for most of that walk back down the aisle, and it really was in comparison with her face. And I was just watching them after those vows had been exchanged, and it was actually very interesting now, as I say, knowing what we know about how it all went, seeing how he was there was a real somber look on his face.
But I think, as you quite rightly say, as we then discovered years later, that this was not exactly the perfect wedding. There were things going on in that background. You know, there was the Camela factor was still very much there at that time. It obviously didn't show on the pictures that we see, and it didn't show at all in any of the coverage that was being made. But it all quickly really turned, you know, quite terrible.
And
really.
you so rightly pointed out that Charles was 32, but also had been born into his role knowing he was going to be the future king. She's 20 years old. That feels so incredibly young to be thrust into this position.
And you have to remember, that's a very, very good point, and you have to remember, you know, this poor girl was in effect thrown into the royal family and basically told, well, you know, get on with it. Completely different to the way Catherine's entrance into the royal family, and Meghan. Fergie was the same. She too was thrown into the royal family in the same way. But I know they came from privileged backgrounds and everything else, but you're talking about stepping up into something that you have got no knowledge of, no real use for. And as I say, Catherine, especially Catherine, got really protected by William. He did not stand for any hassle from anybody about his future wife.
Yes.
As did Harry, not including his own brother. So this is you've got to remember that this poor girl was sort of almost fed to the lions, really, you know.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong, but just picturing the idea, is it not every young girl's dream to marry a prince and have a David Emmanuel wedding dress with a 20-foot long train, 10,000 mother of pearl sequins, and marry the future king at St Paul's Cathedral with people like yourself, Charlie, lined up outside with mugs with your face on? Is that not every young girls' dream to marry a prince.
Look, I can't speak for all of them. I will say this. I think on the day of William and Catherine's wedding, and again, I'm a little bit younger than Catherine, but watching that day unfold, absolutely, I think most girls were thinking how amazing to be in that role. But you're talking about those flashpoints, those exciting big days like this, where it's the fairy tale day. But I think particularly in the last few years, we've learned a lot more than we ever knew before about the day-to-day realities of being, I mean, even with Catherine getting sick and having to deal with that in the public eye. I think that we're learning a lot more about the realities about being a member of the royal family. I don't think there's that same desperation to marry a prince now. I think Harry and William were very popular when they were young. I don't know, when Harry visited Australia in his, but maybe 10, I think it must have been 12 years ago or so, he was there, and there were a lot of women, many whom I knew, lining the streets going down to try to catch a glimpse because they did want to marry Harry or date Harry or all of that. But there was that excitement. I think it is different now, and I also think that the realities is so different from this day. It's the ins and the outs. It's a tough gig.
Was that peak royal family popularity, do you think?
Oh, I think this wedding put the royal family, you know, top of the tree with all the sort of stuff that we normally see today about the costs of the royal family and everything else was put on the back burner because this was a celebration. You know, an excellent celebration of two people. You know, it's interesting you mentioned about, you know, when Harry and William had turned up, and I remember when Charles was going along Bondi Beach and young women were practically throwing themselves at him. You know, he was the one that everybody wanted to marry. Now, I was going to say she won the lottery, but unfortunately she didn't win the lottery.
It seemed to be, at that time, of course, it felt like that was what it was. But even with what came out later with her interviews with Andrew Morton, etc., with the tapes and the book and all of that, I think that it was the War of the Windsors really kind of dismantled that fairy tale very dramatically from that point on. So I think this was sort of the peak of the royal family's popularity and glamour and excitement.
And why was that? Why was this, you know, why is this, as I described it, the most iconic moment, but why the most iconic wedding, but why were the public so behind this fairy tale?
Because I think deep down, people want to have something like a fairy tale for them to hold on to. That, you know, given that we live in a big bad world now, and it wasn't that much better then, you had this thing came along, this wedding came along, and it just gave you hope that everything was going to be all right in the future. Unfortunately, as we found out a little later, you know, even on the honeymoon, things weren't that great. You know, that we discovered that there was still, you know, he'd sent Camela a present and everything else that she found.
There was those bracelets she'd found with the
cufflinks. Cufflink type things that she found, which didn't go down at all well with Diana. And you know, the rot actually had started to set in, you know, quite early on.
Not all. I've read the Brother Grimm, you know, the Grimm fairy tales. Not every fairy tale does have a happy ending.
No.
You know, but they did go on and have, you know, 2 children, William and Harry. They did later, obviously, divorce, and Diana died in 1997 in a car crash, and Charles has remarried. But do you think, looking back to, you know, remembering back to 1981, you were out there on the streets witnessing all, do you think we will ever see, or have we seen, as big a wedding as Charles and Di?
Well, I think William and Catherine's was pretty big. I mean, I was out, you know, at that wedding. I was, you know, in front of Buckingham Palace again, doing my, you know, the routine of, you know, just talking to people and getting to grips. I mean, they did exactly the same as Charles and Diana did. The kiss on the balcony, the whole lot. So, you know. Yeah, I agree with you. This was probably the most iconic wedding, but, you know, William and Catherine was pretty close to it.
And then we got, you know, look forward to George one day.
I know that will be the next one. I assume quite a while down the line, but it is funny to think that'll be the next one, presumably, if he gets married.
Well, that's the benchmark, and it's lovely looking back to that wonderful day and hearing your stories. Thank you, guys. That's all we have time for on this week's Royal Exclusive Rewind. Thanks to my guests, and thanks to you for joining us. I hope you'll tune in next time for more royal nostalgia as we delve back into history to uncover another iconic moment.